You're not free. You're addicted to noise, and you don't even know it. This addiction is so seamlessly woven into the fabric of modern existence that you mistake its symptoms for normal living, its withdrawal for boredom, and its satisfaction for entertainment. You have become dependent on a constant stream of auditory stimulation that prevents the very silence in which authentic freedom is discovered. I have observed this addiction across every level of society, from the executive who cannot work without background music, to the teenager who experiences panic when their earbuds fail, from the family that keeps television noise filling their home, to the individual who has never experienced the profound discomfort of complete quiet. This is not merely preference but dependency, not choice but compulsion disguised as choice. The most insidious aspect of this addiction is its invisibility to those who suffer from it. Like any sophisticated dependency, it has convinced its victims that they are exercising freedom while they are actually serving its demands. You believe you are choosing to fill your environment with sound, but the truth is that silence has become so intolerable that noise is no longer optional. It is necessary for your psychological equilibrium. Research reveals that noise exposure triggers dopamine responses similar to other addictive substances, that chronic sound stimulation alters brain chemistry in ways that create dependency, and that withdrawal from constant auditory input produces anxiety, depression, and cognitive disruption that drives people back to their acoustic drug of choice. Today, I speak of this hidden prison that masquerades as entertainment, this psychological cage that presents itself as connection, this addiction that has convinced an entire civilization that freedom means having access to endless noise rather than the strength to choose silence. The modern world has created an unprecedented acoustic environment designed to capture and hold your attention through continuous stimulation that gradually rewires your nervous system to require external input for basic psychological stability. This dependency operates below conscious awareness, making it nearly impossible to recognize even as it controls your behavior, emotional state, and capacity for independent thought. Research demonstrates that chronic noise exposure activates the same reward circuits as addictive drugs, triggering dopamine release that creates psychological dependency on continued stimulation. Your brain adapts to this constant input by reducing its natural capacity to generate internal satisfaction, making silence feel empty rather than peaceful, quiet feel boring rather than reflective, and solitude feel lonely rather than liberating. The addiction manifests through withdrawal symptoms that most people never connect to their acoustic dependency. When forced into quiet environments, addicted individuals experience anxiety, restlessness, intrusive thoughts, and compelling urges to restore auditory stimulation. These symptoms are typically attributed to stress, boredom, or personality, rather than recognized as evidence of dependency on external sound sources. The sophistication of this addiction lies in how it disguises itself as choice, preference, and lifestyle, rather than compulsion. You believe you enjoy music, prefer active environments, and choose entertainment because these experiences feel positive when they satisfy your dependency. But observe what happens when these options are removed: the discomfort, the urgency, the almost physical need to restore auditory input reveals the true nature of your relationship with noise. Technology has accelerated this dependency by making noise instantly available and socially acceptable in virtually every environment. Smartphones provide constant access to music, podcasts, videos, and social media audio that can fill any moment of potential silence. Wireless headphones eliminate the minor friction that once existed between thought and stimulation. Smart speakers respond to voice commands, making noise activation as effortless as breathing. The addiction is reinforced through what psychologists recognize as variable ratio scheduling, the unpredictable delivery of rewarding content through playlists, social media feeds, and streaming algorithms that keep you engaged by never knowing when the next satisfying audio experience will arrive. This creates the same psychological dependency mechanisms that make gambling addictive, keeping you constantly seeking the next auditory reward. Most critically, the dependency prevents access to the internal states where authentic freedom emerges. When your attention is constantly directed outward toward external stimulation, you lose touch with internal wisdom, intuitive guidance, and the quiet voice of authentic desire that can only be heard in silence. your dependency on noise becomes a barrier to self-knowledge and genuine autonomy. The most sophisticated aspect of noise addiction is how it creates the illusion of choice, while systematically eliminating your capacity to choose silence, stillness, or solitude without discomfort. You experience the selection of music, podcasts, or background sound as expressions of personal preference, but these choices occur within a framework of compulsion that makes non-selection increasingly impossible. True choice requires the genuine option to choose none of the available alternatives without experiencing distress. When silence becomes intolerable, when quiet creates anxiety, when stillness triggers restlessness, your apparent choices about what type of stimulation to consume are actually negotiations with an addiction that has already eliminated the option of choosing nothing at all. The illusion is maintained through the incredible variety and personalization available in modern audio consumption. Streaming platforms offer millions of songs, thousands of podcasts, and personalized recommendations that make your selections feel highly individualized and freely chosen. This vast menu of options disguises the fact that all choices lead to the same outcome: continued dependency on external auditory stimulation. Your preferences within this system become increasingly refined and sophisticated, creating the impression of developing taste, growing knowledge, and expanding experience. You learn to distinguish between genres, discover new artists, and develop strong opinions about quality and style. This expertise reinforces the belief that your consumption is creative self-expression, rather than satisfaction of dependency. The compulsive nature becomes visible when you attempt to exercise the choice to consume no audio stimulation for extended periods. What should be a simple preference, silence over sound, becomes surprisingly difficult to maintain. Physical discomfort, psychological restlessness, and compelling urges to restore stimulation reveal that your relationship with noise has moved beyond preference into dependency territory. Social reinforcement strengthens the illusion by making constant audio consumption appear normal and even admirable. People bond over shared musical tastes, discuss podcast recommendations, and use audio consumption as social currency. The ability to consume large amounts of audio content is treated as cultural sophistication rather than potential addiction symptom. The choice illusion is also maintained through rationalization systems that provide seemingly legitimate reasons for constant stimulation. You tell yourself that background music helps you focus, that podcasts help you learn, that audio entertainment helps you relax. These justifications may contain partial truths, while concealing the underlying compulsion that drives consumption regardless of these stated benefits. Constant noise exposure creates measurable changes in brain structure and function that reduce your capacity for sustained attention, deep reflection, and the kind of focused thinking that generates original insights. These neurological adaptations make you increasingly dependent on external stimulation for basic cognitive functioning, while simultaneously reducing your ability to access the internal mental states where creativity and wisdom emerge. Research reveals that chronic auditory stimulation reduces activity in brain regions responsible for introspection, self-reflection, and internal processing. The default mode network, the neural system active during rest and contemplation, becomes less accessible when constantly interrupted by external input. This creates a dependency cycle where you need external stimulation to feel mentally active because your capacity for internal mental activity has been diminished. The attention hijacking operates through what neuroscientists call stimulus-driven attention, that pulls focus away from internal processes toward external inputs. Your brain learns to expect continuous novelty, change, and stimulation, making sustained focus on internal states feel uncomfortable or impossible. This external orientation becomes so habitual that silence feels like sensory deprivation, rather than opportunity for inner exploration. The neurological changes also affect emotional regulation systems, making external stimulation necessary for maintaining psychological equilibrium. Without auditory input, anxiety increases, mood becomes unstable, and cognitive performance declines. Not because silence is inherently problematic, but because your nervous system has adapted to require external support for functions it once performed independently. The hijacking extends to memory formation and consolidation processes that require quiet mental states to function optimally. Constant auditory input interferes with the brain's ability to process experiences, form lasting memories, and extract meaning from daily events. This creates a paradox where increased information consumption leads to decreased retention and understanding. Perhaps most concerning is how attention hijacking affects decision-making capabilities. The prefrontal cortex regions responsible for executive function become less active when constantly processing external stimulation. This reduces your capacity for long-term planning, impulse control, and the kind of strategic thinking that authentic freedom requires. Your choices become increasingly reactive rather than reflective. The neurological adaptations also reduce tolerance for uncertainty, ambiguity, and the open-ended mental states that creativity requires. Your brain becomes accustomed to having questions answered immediately, problems resolved quickly, and mental gaps filled instantly. This intolerance for mental space eliminates the cognitive conditions where breakthrough insights typically emerge. The constant availability of auditory stimulation has created a form of psychological imprisonment where escape from distraction becomes increasingly difficult to achieve and maintain. This prison operates through your own choices and preferences, making it nearly impossible to recognize, because the bars are built from apparently desirable entertainment options rather than obviously restrictive constraints. The prison walls are constructed from the accumulated effects of chronic stimulation that make silence feel punitive rather than peaceful. When quiet becomes uncomfortable, when stillness triggers anxiety, when solitude creates depression, your apparent freedom to choose stimulation transforms into compulsion to avoid the discomfort of withdrawal. You are free to choose your entertainment, but not free to choose its absence. This imprisonment is particularly insidious because it prevents access to the mental states where genuine freedom is experienced and authentic desires are discovered. Freedom is not just the ability to choose among available options, but the capacity to step back from all options and choose from a place of centered clarity rather than compulsive need. Perpetual distraction eliminates this stepping back space. The prison operates through what might be called attention capitalism, economic and technological systems designed to capture and hold your mental focus for profit. Your addiction to stimulation becomes valuable to others, who profit from your inability to disconnect, creating incentives for making distraction increasingly sophisticated, personalized, and difficult to resist. Within this prison, you may feel active, engaged, and connected while actually being passive, reactive, and isolated from authentic self-contact. The stimulation provides the illusion of mental activity, while actually preventing the kind of deep thinking that leads to insight. The entertainment creates the feeling of connection, while interfering with genuine intimacy with yourself and others. The most tragic aspect of this imprisonment is how it prevents you from discovering what you actually want versus what you have been conditioned to want. Your authentic desires, values, and directions can only be clearly perceived in states of inner quiet that perpetual stimulation makes inaccessible. You remain trapped, not just by distraction, but by ignorance of what you would choose if you could choose from freedom rather than addiction. The prison also operates temporally, trapping you in immediate gratification cycles that prevent long-term planning and development. Constant stimulation keeps you focused on present-moment satisfaction rather than future consequences, making it difficult to make choices that serve long-term flourishing over immediate pleasure. Breaking free from noise addiction requires recognizing that silence is not empty space waiting to be filled, but full presence that contains everything necessary for psychological well-being, creative insight, and authentic self-direction. This liberation begins with the discipline to create and maintain quiet spaces despite the discomfort that withdrawal from stimulation initially produces. The process of liberation reveals the difference between loneliness and solitude, between boredom and openness, between emptiness and spaciousness. What noise addiction interprets as negative states requiring immediate remedy are actually natural conditions that become comfortable and valuable when experienced without the urgency to escape them through stimulation. Chosen silence gradually restores your capacity for sustained attention, deep reflection, and the kind of patient observation that leads to wisdom rather than mere information accumulation. As your tolerance for quiet increases, you discover mental capabilities that constant stimulation had made inaccessible: intuitive insights, creative solutions, and clear perception of your authentic values and desires. The liberation process often involves what might be called stimulation withdrawal, periods of anxiety, restlessness, and compelling urges to restore auditory input. These symptoms are temporary evidence that your nervous system is readjusting to function without external support, rather than indications that silence is harmful or that stimulation is necessary. As you develop comfort with quiet, you begin to notice how much mental energy was being consumed by processing constant auditory input. This liberated attention becomes available for deeper engagement with whatever you choose to focus on, whether work, relationships, creative projects, or simple presence with immediate experience. The freedom that emerges from breaking noise addiction is not just the absence of compulsion, but the presence of choice. Genuine choice that includes the option to select nothing, to prefer quiet, to choose internal focus over external stimulation. This expanded range of authentic options creates the psychological space where real freedom operates. Perhaps most valuable is how liberation from noise addiction affects your relationship with your own mind. Instead of needing external input to feel mentally active, you discover the richness of internal mental life. Instead of requiring stimulation to avoid uncomfortable thoughts or feelings, you develop capacity to be present with whatever arises internally, without needing to change or escape it. The path I walked required learning to distinguish between chosen stimulation and compulsive consumption, between preference and addiction, between entertainment and dependency. In breaking free from unconscious noise addiction, I discovered that what I had mistaken for freedom was actually a sophisticated form of bondage that kept me trapped in reactive patterns while believing I was exercising choice. I learned that true freedom includes the freedom from stimulation, as well as access to it. The capacity to choose silence as readily as sound. The ability to be comfortable in quiet, as well as engaged with entertainment. This expanded range of authentic choice revealed how narrow my apparent freedom had actually been, when noise addiction was controlling my options. The withdrawal from constant stimulation was initially uncomfortable, revealing the extent to which my psychological equilibrium had become dependent on external input. But as this dependency dissolved, I discovered internal sources of satisfaction, creativity, and mental activity that external stimulation had been preventing me from accessing. Your modern world has created unprecedented opportunities for auditory stimulation, while making silence increasingly rare and difficult to access. The same technologies that provide infinite entertainment options also make disconnection from stimulation socially awkward, practically challenging, and psychologically uncomfortable for those who have developed dependency. But these same conditions make the capacity to choose silence more valuable than ever. In a world of constant noise, the ability to be comfortable in quiet becomes a superpower. In an environment of perpetual distraction, sustained focus becomes a competitive advantage. In a culture of compulsive stimulation, voluntary simplicity becomes profound sophistication. The recognition that you may be addicted to noise rather than freely choosing it is not meant to create shame, but to create possibility. Addiction is a form of imprisonment that can be escaped once recognized. The patterns that control you unconsciously lose their power when brought into conscious awareness and addressed with appropriate strategies. Begin by experimenting with small periods of chosen silence, moments without music, podcasts, television, or other auditory stimulation. Notice what arises in these quiet spaces: discomfort, restlessness, anxiety, or perhaps surprising peace and clarity. Your reactions to silence will reveal the true nature of your relationship with noise. Gradually extend these quiet periods, developing tolerance for the withdrawal symptoms that may arise. These symptoms are temporary evidence of readjustment, rather than permanent problems requiring immediate solution. Like any addiction recovery process, breaking free from noise dependency requires patience with the discomfort of change. Most importantly, begin to question whether your audio consumption choices are actually choices or responses to compulsion you haven't recognized. True choice includes the genuine option to choose nothing without distress. If silence creates significant discomfort, you may be dealing with dependency rather than preference. You're not free when your psychological well-being depends on constant external stimulation. When quiet creates anxiety, when solitude triggers depression, when stillness feels intolerable, but you can become free by recognizing these dependencies and gradually developing the internal resources that make external stimulation truly optional rather than necessary. Your liberation from noise addiction becomes liberation from one of the most subtle and pervasive forms of modern bondage. In choosing silence, you choose access to internal wisdom, creative insight, and authentic self-direction that constant stimulation makes impossible to discover. The path to genuine freedom passes through the uncomfortable territory of withdrawal from dependencies you may not have recognized as dependencies, but on the other side of that discomfort lies the profound freedom of choice that includes all options, including the option to choose nothing at all. Break free from the noise and discover the person you actually are beneath all the stimulation. In that discovery lies the beginning of authentic autonomy, genuine creativity, and the kind of deep satisfaction that no external entertainment can provide.